But right now, we've got Pablo Maurer on the line, I believe. Pablo, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good, doing well.
Pablo, thank you for coming on the show. I'm excited that this article came out, and I'm curious if did it. I think I remember someone just adding you saying, "Boy, it would sure be great to have an oral history on this." Was it that, or was this already cooking? Was this already in your back pocket? You said this is something you got to do for before the season starts.
Yeah, actually, Paul Tenorio, a colleague of mine, he and Sam Stachko, another colleague, they do a podcast called Allocation Disorder, and somehow the Thierry Henry, Roy Miller free kick came up, and Paul had said on the podcast, "Oh, I got to do an oral history on that free kick." So in our staff call the next day, I said, "Hey, you and I should team up and just do an oral history of the entire game," because I was there, and it was still one of the most bizarre experiences of my professional life. And Paul very quickly was like, "Well, you just do the whole thing." So that's how that came about. No, it's something, I mean, I wanted to write it for a while. It's just one of those things that's still, it's like fairly recent history, but I guess when I think of it, it's almost been a decade, but no, it's something I wanted to write for a minute for sure.
The time passage was very evident to me when I saw all the players that you were talking to. And now most of them are sort of towards the end of their careers, or they've moved on to 2 or 3 different teams. It was interesting. I felt older I was like, oh, that had to be like a couple years ago, right? And then I looked at the byline and I was like, oh man, nope. All these things, MLS seems to move fast, and particularly these sort of these historical landmarks sort of go really fast in the rear view. And I wanted to start sort of. I imagine most of our viewers and listeners are familiar with this game. But I don't think we got the things that everyone remembers. The De Leon goal, I think that's the iconic visual memory. But what of the conversations that you had, what was the thing that sort of stuck out to you as something that you knew about Roy Miller, you knew about the goal, you knew about the snow? What were the sort of the really surprising stuff that came through in the quotes? What's something that surprised you as you were talking to these folks?
I was surprised by. I mean, I spent the entire night before, so the game when that was snowed out or postponed or whatever. I'd gone there with a photo credential to shoot the game, so I spent it sort of wandering the hallways around both locker rooms, trying to kind of gather information. And it was, as I said in the piece, it was like, or as everyone said, it was like very apparent that the Red Bulls did not want to play the game. I mean, I cannot stress to you enough the fact that it was like Thierry Henry was sort of leading the charge, and it was just like, I mean, you could hear his voice, was complaining to the refs, anybody would listen. And I guess what I was surprised by was, I knew that to be true, but to hear Dax, Mike Petke, Luis Robles, all these guys really almost go out of their way to say, yeah, it was ridiculous. It was pretty obvious that, the sort of elite players and decision makers of the club didn't want to play. And the standout quote to me was Petke saying that, hey, I knew we lost the game right then and there, psychologically. I guess I was just surprised at how candid a lot of the Red Bulls guys were, because it's not a pleasant thing to admit. It's an embarrassing thing to admit. It's, athletes aren't supposed to ever not want to sort of go out there and kill each other, whatever you want to say, So I was pretty surprised by that, honestly. The rest of it, it was like, would have been hard for me to be surprised by any of it. Having been there and covered it and having sort of been kind of embedded in the whole thing, but no, I was definitely surprised by how candid a lot of those guys were.
Pablo, this has always been a rivalry. Me as somebody who's followed this team for a long time. The DC New York Red Bulls rivalry has more history, more crazy moments. You look back on this game, and I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, this was the last time really that we had, sort of it was number one, a game that matters, and number two, it was sort of the craziness of the moving the matches, the snow game. It really just kind of had it all. And this is a rivalry that is very much on life support. I mean, it matters to me. It matters to Mark Fishkin. It matters to DC and Red Bulls fans. But you talk about from a sort of a league perspective, they're busy trying to get the Red Bull and New York City FC rivalry. They've been shopping around a rival for us. I guess it's Atlanta. It may have been Philly. What do you see? Is it just a matter that the teams just haven't been good, or what do you see as sort of a way to sort of get the pageantry of this rivalry sort of back on its feet?
Yeah, I mean the rivalry's certainly been irrelevant since NYCFC entered the league. The league itself has done nothing to sort of foster. I think I actually wrote a piece maybe last year about this, where I talked to some of the originals who are involved in it, some of the more recent players. And if you get a guy like Benny or, Bill Hamid as somebody who this rivalry is still like deeply meaningful to him, probably of anyone on the team, he does the best job of connecting with the club's history. Obviously, part of that has to do with the fact that he's been around for a decade. He came up supporting the team and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just lost so much of its juice. So that having been said, like it's never going to reclaim any of its glory unless there's some like really memorable moments. And DC hasn't been very good, recently. The two sides haven't really played very many memorable games. I mean, the 2012 game, probably the last really significant game in the rivalry was, I want to say, in 2015 when Red Bull beat DC in the playoffs at RFK to sort of like break that curse. Since then it's been kind of largely irrelevant. The league obviously is always sort of moving on to the next sort of like sexy rivalry that it can promote. And honestly, like the NYCFC Red Bulls one makes a lot more sense, but anyone who's been around for 10, 15, 20, 25 years has a sort of special appreciation for the Atlantic Cup. I wrote in the piece that I wrote last year that the last time I saw the Atlantic Cup, which I think was in 2016, the actual trophy I'm talking about, it was in the DC locker room and it was being used to hold a door open. So that's like... So yeah, that shows you, like, even physically that the actual trophy has sort of fallen to, I think it was also based on a week later, and there were like energy bars in it. It was like on the training table, and there were like, it was full of like, Powerade or something like that. So I don't know. I would love to see it come back, man. Even in 2012, it was like the hatred was so deep. It was such a fun rivalry. So I definitely miss it.
I am not giving up hope. I think both teams need to have sort of a sustained amount of success. I also I think the league as a whole has kind of moved on from the trophies for rivalries thing. You're not hearing the sponsored Rocky Mountain Cup. I guess Cascadia is still a thing, but it's not as good. John, you had the next one, but you go ahead.
Yeah. We could talk through each element of this. I think there are so many interesting things. We want to make sure that people actually subscribe and read. So if you're not subscribed, go subscribe. Use promo code RFK Refugees for 0% off 12-month. I suggest you do that. But
3 days you can get a subscription for $1 a month for 6 months. There's a link in the story. So, I mean, if you can't be pay $1 a month, then I don't, I'm not going to talk to you. Whatever. My favorite
thing to do is go on Reddit whenever I post an athletic article and have someone say, can someone put the info there for me? I'm like, listen, I will downvote you. I will downvote you if you try to steal it. And if you say it's too expensive, that's the only thing I can physically do to you. But the thing that came through, I think a lot of other things came through, but one was, it was the practical realization of the power of Ben Olsen as like a motivational speaker. DeLeon spoke about it. The quote from Ben Olsen said that they were going to fucking eat their faces. Like I felt myself getting charged up just reading, like I got secondhand buzz from reading old quotes or quotes about a thing that happened in 2012. Obviously there are limits to how much you can juice somebody up and get performance out of them. But I feel like this was the embodiment of the argument for Ben Olsen. Like the argument for the will over the skill, the will over whatever the actual result of the game should be. I feel like everybody you talked to came away with that. They were like, we knew we were not as good. We knew that they were the big glitzy team, and we were just going to put it in their face, and it didn't matter. And it seemed like that helped a lot in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I did look. The piece was 6,200 words. I want to say at the end of the day, which is long, but I did 17 interviews, and I want to say that everything transcribed was 35,000 words. And I mentioned that because there was so much stuff that got left on the cutting room floor, and honestly, every DC player I talked to, there were 6 of them. I mean, just really hammered home on that it was like that was Ben's. And Ben was not far removed from his playing days back then. I remember I saw Ben that night on the field. He's walking around. I took a photo of him, and he walked up to me, and I just said, what do you think of this? And he just said, perfect. This one word, and I remember right then and there being like, holy shit, these guys really want to get out here. He was, I think at the very end, man, he kind of lost that team last year, even in the locker room, the sort of like rah-rah mentality. I mean, when you just lose game after game, there's no like you said, that only goes so far, but he got a lot of mileage out of that, man, with a lot of teams. And if you get like the team like the 2012 one that has like a few skilled players on it, you have guys like, Ben's other specialty is taking these sort of cast-offs. In 2012, it was a guy like D-Row. In 2011 too, who just got offloaded by the Red Bulls. He's done it with other sort of MLS veterans. Boswell's another one. So if you get like a few skilled players, a few guys who have a chip on their shoulder, then you get like a few young guys who'd come up, guys like Andy Nahar, Bill Hamid that year. Pontius was, and I want to say his second or third year. It was just sort of like the perfect storm. That team was easily the most entertaining DC team I've ever covered. The only one that even comes close is, the second half of 2018, obviously, but the 2012 team was kind of something special.
Well, let's talk. Obviously, this is a new era in DC. We have the Hernan Losada era. We have a lot of other changes of the club. I guess there's a lot of, I guess I'll call it unhappiness. There's a lot of angst amongst fans of sort of wanting to know what the direction is. We've gotten maybe little snippets of things. Where do you sort of see, I mean, if you had to give sort of an overall state of the club right now entering this new era, there are mistakes that have been made. We've talked about the supporter issue. There was sort of the embarrassing story about that you broke about the having to have people in the front office stay at night and sort of watch security cameras. What do you sort of see as sort of the state of this club? Is it are things as bad as some fans want to make it, or are they completely, are they right? Or is there some exaggeration that goes on? And I know that was a very broad question. I gave a broad question.
I think the team has spent more in recent years, but probably not enough. They've missed on a few signings. As far as the front office goes, there's no way around the fact that they're grossly understaffed. There's no way around something like the security thing. There's no way around them not being diverse enough. These are all things that are just true. I think fans, I think fans should push the team hard to improve in those areas. I think the fans should push the team hard to improve on the field. So I don't know. I see the club as being kind of in transition, but certainly there's so many areas they could do better at. And the thing is, you got a lot of clubs now. I mean, I for example, the stadium itself. I mean, look, man, I get that. For example, it costs half as much to build a building in Cincinnati as it does in DC. But if I'm a DC United season ticket holder and I'm looking at that stadium that they have in Cincinnati right now, there is a huge kind of WTF element to that. The bar in MLS is being raised so rapidly at this point at every club, not just the big ones, that it'd be easy for DC to get left in the dust. So look, I think there's a lot of things they've done well. Like I said, they spent more. I think the coaching change, I have a special place reserved somewhere in my heart for Ben Olsen, but it was a necessary thing. Even Ben said so. I can tell you the players I talked to this year absolutely love Losada, and I think there's a lot of promise there. He's a young coach with a lot to prove. clear tactics, so I think the club is headed in the right direction. I just think that people need to kind of continue to usher them in that correct direction, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I think the pressure is important for sure. The way we've sort of been looking at this year is, I think we've generally landed on Hernan is not going to have obviously he's not going to have the financial support to change the team in the way he wants this year. He has himself in numerous media opportunities lowered expectations to the floor as much as possible, sometimes in ways that seem a little bit over the top, but I understand the impetus. But I think we basically said that his job this year is to get career average performances out of all the players that were brought in the last 2 years that over last season specifically all underperformed. And I think we sort of handicapped them at the minimum we expect is the 8th spot in the playoffs, and the maximum, I think I said in the last show, is like the 7th. Like, I think that they're good enough to get in. They're not really in a position to really be threatening anywhere higher than that. Based on who's been brought in this year, you disagree?
I expect more than that out of DC this year, honestly. I mean, like you sort of touched on briefly, so much of this is going to be like, okay, if they get like a much better year out of Julian Gressel, if they get a much better year, really mainly out of Edison Flores, if they get a great year out of Bill, I think they could be competitive. I don't think they're going to light the world on fire, but I'm wary of the sort of like the excuse making thing that you mentioned, the sort of like, well, he didn't have time to like put a stamp on the roster, that sort of bullshit. I mean, again, this is MLS, man. There are teams that compete that spend half the money DC will this year, so I think, I don't know, I would expect more out of the team than literally making it to the play-in game or something like that, I mean, I'm sure I could potentially eat my words. I thought they might be pretty okay last year too, but they made some decent additions. I'm starting to get like at least quasi excited about covering the team, which is not something that happens every year. So
right, understandable. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we are probably emotionally hedging, I think, is what we're doing there. I think, and we're still sort of curious about where the goals are going to come from. I think that's Nigel Roberto seems great, but I don't think that we've solved a slam dunk solution to the goal scoring drought. So I think that's probably a lot of it. But I think you are right.
With a player like Roberto, it's hard to know. I mean, Eric Sorgat scored like 800 goals in Estonia, and he's just sort of like, look, I don't watch a lot of like Bulgarian soccer, so I'm impressed by what I've seen. Certainly he seems like technically adept player, but it's just these European players are a total crapshoot. I mean, so are the ones that DC has gotten from Central and South America too. Some have worked out very well, others not so much, but who knows? I mean, we have no idea. Roberto could come in and score 15 goals easily in MLS. You just never honestly know with these folks, so we'll see what happens.
I think any signing's a crapshoot. I mean, there are no sure things. Everyone wanted to think that Atlanta's past couple big signings have been, they're sure bets, and now, they're not. So it's the nature of the international market in a lot of things.
But there is usually a ceiling when you spend $1.1 million. The ceiling's a little bit lower. So he could, that's the great thing about those budget signings is they can make Dave look like a genius, like in a much better way than a $10 million signing performing well. You're like, well, yeah, that's what was supposed to happen. Good. Yeah. So maybe there's that. He could get the front office award.
Yeah. MLS
but anyway,
GMs, to be clear, I'm not just talking about Dave Casper. MLS GMs as a whole get a lot of mileage out of a few signings. They only have to like hit one a year or something like that to look like a genius, apparently. So I don't know. Again, I'm painting in broad strokes there. I'm not just talking about DC United, but
yeah. So Pablo, thanks for joining us. I want to make sure that we plug the piece again. Make sure that you check out The Athletic. I think it's one of the featured pieces, so it should not be hard to find. And there's a lot of great anecdotes, particularly from. I thought Dax and Petke were extremely candid, and I enjoyed their quotes the most, particularly coming from the other side. And somehow, I don't understand how, and I shouldn't even probably admit this, the penalty re-kick had been edited out from my brain. I remembered everything else about it, and that is such a notable part, but it was gone.
What?
And then I was like, oh, that did happen. I forgot. I know. And somehow it was gone. I knew Bill was gone, but then the retake, it was anyway. Make sure you read it. If you're like me and somehow your brain edited up the most notable and exciting part of the game, and still you had great feelings about it, check it out. I think too the point you brought up, that you talked about the team going to see the fans in the upper deck after the cancellation, then also celebrating with them after the win. I feel like that is, Jimmy's quote about it was great. That's some of the things we've talked about on the show, like that set MLS teams, but DC United specifically apart from, the Wizards or the Nationals, like that sort of attention and care, like the quotes about, man, they came up here on a weekday. They spent money to come up on this bus. Like that's hard for them. They had to call out of work. And I don't know that thought process goes on. And, somebody who makes $35 million a year playing left field for the Nationals and during a rainout, I don't know if that thought goes by.
I honestly, I was literally standing behind the bench when I want to say it was Pontius and Brandon, but I heard Pontius turn to Brandon McDonald and say, we got to go up there. And I have a video. I actually meant to put it on YouTube and embed it in the piece. I followed them up over there, up the stairs, sort of filming it. And, I'm I would say generally I'm a pretty cynical guy. And I found the whole thing very moving. I did. It's like, it seemed, I always, you always wonder, there's like a connection that exists between players and fans. And sometimes it's like, you can kind of tell the players are sort of faking it, or, like they're just sort of going through the motions. Other times it's really real. And that was a very real moment. That was, and it's funny, later in the piece, Joe Willis has a line where he says that he was looking up at the fans before the penalty retake. And I thought to myself, that's bullshit. Okay, well, go watch the video. There's actually a close-up of him right before Cooper hits it, and he's looking straight up at the upper deck. So it's just like, in my head, I was like, that's nuts, because it just sounded like something Joe was saying just for storytelling purposes, but you very clearly see him looking at the fans, so it's nuts. I mean, it was a very real thing. It was just a weird 2 days, man. I mean, the first night I ended up at Thomas Floyd, who used to write for Goal.com. Now he does stuff for the Washington Post. He's an entertainment reporter there. I slept on the floor of his motel room in Newark, New Jersey. It was like one of the grossest sleeping accommodations I ever had. But I mean, it was just like, when that game got canceled, everybody was scrambling, and it was just nuts, man. It was fun. Life was simpler back then.
For sure.
Fewer possibilities.
So make sure you subscribe to The Athletic, read that article, subscribe to Open Wide for Sub Soccer for their once annual show to make sure you're checking that out. Again, Bob. Yeah, that's right. Get a plug in for the inactive show. I feel like that's a good thing to do for you. Pablo, thanks for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Yep. Thanks, Pablo.